fourth to the Supreme Court. And then you look at her Twitter page. Eiffel's Twitter page is full of racist attacks against dreaded white people. Here's one example from July of 2018. Quote, truth and reconciliation efforts have little chance in many places because whites view truth-telling as an act of violence. Really? They do? All whites? Oh yes, says Sharon Eiffel. They're all the same. Same skin color, same belief. Now that's a common attitude on the left. It's not a reassuring attitude for a Supreme Court justice. We'll see how she does. Meanwhile, CNN is also recommending a woman called Eunice Lee. Now, Eunice Lee may be a perfectly nice person, we don't know, but she first became a judge in August of 2021. That was, let's do the math, less than 6 months ago. Candace Jackson-Akwumi has even less experience in that. She may be nice as well, but she reached the bench for the first time in July of last year. The other nominees on CNN's list had more judicial experience. We'll give you 3 guesses to how they got that experience, how they get there. Wilhelmina Mimi Wright became an associate justice on Minnesota Supreme Court back in 2012. Now, the sad thing about what we're about to tell you is Mimi Wright may be the best judge ever, the smartest person ever. But as always, the media minimized her, dehumanized her in its coverage. The media celebrated her nomination not because of her legal ability, which they barely describe, but because of the way she looks, her skin color. And that is a big part of why Governor Mark Dayton appointed her in the first place. He said that. Here's how the Star Tribune covered her appointment. Quote, Dayton's historic choice, first black female Supreme Court justice. That was the headline. Unmentioned is how she might do on the Supreme Court. Again, nobody wins in identity politics. The people it's designed to help are completely dehumanized and patronized, reduced to colors rather than human beings. And in some cases, the rest of us get really crappy service because the best people aren't being chosen. That's just true. Ability is the only criterion that matters. Skin color is irrelevant. Ketanji Brown Jackson got the same treatment. To be fair, we should note that unlike other candidates CNN is putting forward, Brown Jackson has authentically suffered in her life. She's not joking. She literally went to Harvard with Joy Reid.
I happen to know Ketanji Brown Jackson. I knew her as Ketanji Brown when we were in college, so I think she's wonderful.
Imagine what that was like. You went to college with Joy Reid? I was in Fallujah, you went to college with Joy Reid. Who suffered more? Well, after leaving the rough and tumble of Cambridge with Joy Reid, Brown Jackson wound up on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals last summer. Well, her credentials. Well, here's how ABC News covered her confirmation at the time. They told us that Jackson is, quote, the first black woman confirmed to an appellate court in a decade, and she will now be one of 5 black female circuit court judges currently serving. But hey, who's counting? Again, you have to wonder, Brown Jackson, who we don't know, maybe a super great person, really smart person. How would you feel if you were her? What about her achievements? Irrelevant. The media focused on her race, and maybe there was a reason for that because her actual record as a judge, honestly, pretty awful. She's been overturned unanimously by the D.C. Appellate Court multiple times in just the past few years. So you have to wonder at this point, since we're going by skin color and gender, why Joe Biden is ignoring the obvious choice. Why doesn't Biden strike a real blow for equity and just nominate Bridget Floyd? Who's that? Was George Floyd's sister. She's not a judge or a lawyer or whatever, but at this stage, who cares? Clearly, that's not the point anymore, this law stuff. As Nebraska Senator Roman Horasko once said in defense of one of Richard Nixon's dumber judicial nominees, quote, even if he is mediocre, there are a lot of mediocre judges and people and lawyers. They're entitled to a little representation, aren't they? Well, sure they are.
It is
Bridget
true, too.
Floyd could be a justice for the rest of us, or at least a slice of the rest of us.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
Fucker.
Play right into Republican messaging, i.e., fire Pelosi?
Is very motivating, I'm sure, Todd, for some folks to get out if that is the added incentive. But you see the Democratic message now, right? You have to vote in this election because democracy is at stake. They don't have the bumper sticker on all the things people really, really care about, inflation and crime and the border and education. And the Democratic Party, by the way, has a leader right now in the Oval Office that's 79 years old. with an impossibly light work schedule, by the way. A 71-year-old Senate Majority Leader in Chuck Schumer, and as Todd just mentioned, or excuse me, as Griff just mentioned, an 82-year-old or will be 82-year-old House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who, speaking of numbers, by the way, is at 33% approval in the Real Clear Politics average, so not exactly running on great numbers either. Look, the party needs to get younger, as in born after black and white TV was a thing younger, and Nancy Pelosi embodies everything about the swamp, existing to hold on to her power and little else, because how else can you explain what she has done to help the people in her home district of San Francisco? Skyrocketing crime, drugs, homelessness, and you almost never hear her talk about it, talk about actual solutions. And by the way, you can save the tape. She's not going to be Speaker of the House. A red tsunami is coming that's going to sweep her out with about 40 to 50 seats to spare. And the squad wing of the party, they're going to ensure that she will not even be House Minority Leader after taking such a shellacking, Carly.
This is also not welcome news to a lot of Democrats. Here is CNN contributor Bakari Sellers. Listen to what he had to say.
I firmly believe that it's time for new leadership in the House Democratic Caucus. I think it's time for new leadership throughout the Democratic Party. Not only do we have to get younger, but we have to be more vibrant, and we have to have bigger and bolder ideas to bring in a new generation of voters. There comes a time, whether or not you're Nancy Pelosi or whether or not you're, Tom Brady, that sometimes you have to hang up the cleats when it comes to, being leader of your particular party or leader of your organization.
So, Joe, does that comment show the divide within the Democratic Party?
Oh, completely, right? Bakari Sellers is probably a good 40 years younger than Nancy Pelosi, and people just don't want to see the same old leadership that has failed over the last year, by the way. Can we please stop with the Pelosi-Brady comparisons? Brady's won 7 Super Bowls. He has a history of winning on a consistent basis. You tell me how many wins Nancy Pelosi has had lately, win valuable prizes.
Yeah, I just think nobody likes this other than Nancy Pelosi herself and Republicans. This is a campaign ad. It writes itself. Something everybody loves is ice cream. Some people love it a little bit too much, and it really shows how out of touch they are. Joe Biden, of course, grabbing ice cream to highlight economic growth. Look, isn't this a complete failure to read the room? I mean, people are struggling to put actual nutritional food on their table to feed their families, and this guy's going up to a shishi ice cream restaurant to be like, look, the economy's great. Not reading the room, right, Joe?
Yeah, Pyro. And White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked yesterday why the president had an almost non-existent schedule yesterday, and even she had trouble spitting the answer. Well, it turns out that going for ice cream on a random Tuesday in winter was a good idea from an optics perspective, because when that optic is juxtaposed with Russian troops amassing on the border of Ukraine, as you mentioned, astronomical gas prices, food prices, home heating prices, and by the way, wouldn't it have been great if a reporter asked him, hey, Mr. President, did you get sprinkles with your ice cream? And he responds, of course I didn't get sprinkles, you stupid son of a bitch. That would have been perfect, but we didn't get that question, unfortunately.
This is part, Joe, of the Biden administration's revamped effort in year 2 to get the president out of the White House, out of Delaware, and hang out with the American people directly. Do you think it's going to work?
Well, I don't think you go to, as Todd described it, a shishi ice cream place a couple blocks down, right, from the White House. I think you've got to get out and speak to the American people in Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia. You've got to get out and talk about economic issues, not, again, who gets ice cream in the afternoon in the winter on a Tuesday? I don't think I've ever done it.
Yeah.
Also, we're showing a video of him shopping. Keep in mind, he purchased a Kamala mug. So put those two together, Joe. You got him buying a mug with the face of his vice president.
He bought that sweatshirt for his grandson.
And then also eating ice cream. Meantime,
obvious, because this is the obvious show. If you live in the United States, you may have noticed that many of our public spaces have become permanent homeless encampments. You see trash-filled tents blotting out what were once green and tidy public parks. You step over vagrants drooling unconscious on the steps of train stations on the way to work. You watch as junkies smoke meth without any embarrassment at all and then yell at pedestrians on the sidewalk, maybe at your children. Everywhere, at every intersection, there are beggars. It's what we used to imagine India was like, but this is not Calcutta. This is New York, and San Francisco, and Austin, Texas. So the question is, what happened? And the short answer is, our leaders did this. No matter what they tell you, homelessness is not an act of God. It's not the result of economic collapse in this country. America did not run out of housing. Instead, a determined group of well-funded ideologues decided to make it easier to live on the streets in this country while doing drugs. Therefore, many more people now live on the streets while doing drugs. See? Not complicated. In 2005, an unemployed alcoholic called Basil Humphrey enrolled in a rehab program in Boise, Idaho. When Humphrey refused to stop drinking, the rescue mission kicked him out. Those were the rules, and he spent months sleeping outside, as so many do. Eventually, local authorities ticketed him for camping on public property. That was the law. The story would have ended there, except that a huge corporate law firm in New York City called Latham & Watkins took an interest in the case on the other side of the country. Now, typically, Latham & Watkins represents Wall Street banks and prominent Democratic office holders. But the firm wanted to change vagrancy laws to increase homelessness. Why did they want that? We don't know. But the firm filed a lawsuit on Basil Humphrey's behalf against the city of Boise. That suit made it to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. In 2018, the court declared that cities have no right to criminalize homelessness. In fact, the court ruled cities have an obligation to provide free housing to the homeless at public expense. The Supreme Court later upheld that ruling. The case was known as Martin versus Boise, and it had exactly the effect that Latham & Watkins intended. City officials across the country no longer had an obligation to protect the public and public spaces from drug addicts who decided to live in them. At the same time, politicians suddenly had access to a massive new source of cash. Taxpayer money, many billions in taxpayer money, for something called homelessness prevention. Now, what is homelessness prevention? Well, of course, it's the opposite of what they call it, as always. Here's Seattle's interpretation of homelessness prevention.
A handful of Seattle's more than 12,000 homeless will soon be going from the street to a new apartment with stunning views of the Space Needle and Puget Sound. Using part of its share of the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, the city bought 3 brand new apartment buildings for $50 million for 165 homeless, a price of $300,000 per unit. In Los Angeles, Skid Row is about to get a new neighbor, a 19-story high-rise for homeless, costing taxpayers $160 million, or $580,000 per unit. They're part of an expensive push to get the homeless off of sidewalks and out of city parks and into government-subsidized housing, even if it means buying new buildings at market rate from developers.
Oh, stunning views of the Space Needle and Puget Sound. Do you have one?
I'm just going to mention that because I see femininity. I'm always complaining that there's no femininity in the system. Well, every once in a while, I'll think I'll see it. But anyways, there's lips right here, these big feminine-looking lips for a large feminine face right here. Let's try to get it. Oh, here she comes. Here she comes. Yep. In a couple different directions. So you got one set of eyes up here, nose right here, lips right here. The lips are feminine. The lips look a little crooked at this angle for that image, but that's one of them. And then back here, let's see, here she comes. So here she comes this way. You can notice the lips a little better now at this angle. So I'll get my finger out of the way. But you see the feminine lips, and you can start seeing the image coming in this way. So when I say there's no femininity, you only have faces. So if you only have that to go with, it's kind of tough. But I would say that those lips look on the feminine side. Anyways, just thought I'd mention it.
Have one of those? Well, crackheads do. More than $500,000 per apartment to house drug addicts at public expense, at market rates. So you can see why real estate developers would strongly support a program like that, and of course they strongly do. But luxury apartments are just the beginning. Seattle's most recent municipal budget allocates more than $150 million to other so-called homelessness programs, just this year. Now keep in mind, Seattle has fewer than 750,000 people living there. So that's an awful lot of money per bum. It's certainly a lot more than anyone else is getting in Seattle. At the same time it was giving overpriced condos to drug addicts with stunning views of Puget Sound, Seattle allocated just $10 million total for its small business stabilization fund designed to keep family businesses from going bankrupt during the COVID lockdowns. So the city's priorities could not be clearer than that. You lavish money on the least productive, most antisocial parasites in our society, and then you punish Americans who work for a living. Got it? And it's hardly just Seattle. The latest city budget in San Francisco proposes spending $667 million on something called the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. And yet, at the very same time, San Francisco's Department of Children, Youth, and Families gets less than half that amount. A city program designed to help low-income families pay college tuition gets just $16 million total. That's about 2% of what the homeless get. So in San Francisco, it makes sense. In fact, it pays to get high on the sidewalk. Don't bother to get an education. Nobody cares. That's the message from the city. Couldn't be clearer. In Austin, Texas, the city's budget for homelessness assistance was $68 million last year. At the very same time, the city of Austin spent just $3.5 million in new loans for struggling small businesses, and only $7 million for, quote, mission-critical infrastructure and deferred maintenance at city facilities, like the things that matter. And at the same time as this was going on, the police department in the city of Austin got an $11 million budget cut. So what happened to the homelessness in Austin, the problem they were trying to, quote, solve? Well, to no one's surprise, it has grown by 10% in just 2 years. You get what you pay for. When you pay for homelessness, you get a lot more of it. See how that works? In Los Angeles, politicians have spent billions, quote, fighting homelessness. This has been accompanied, of course, by a massive increase in the number of people who are homeless. 4 years ago, the city spent $440 million on what it called solutions to homelessness. That was supposed to fix the problem. Did it? Homelessness in Los Angeles jumped 15% just last year. So this year, LA will spend more, close to $1 billion on the homeless in 2022. As for the small businesses crushed by the city's lunatic COVID restrictions, you ask? What will they get? Well, they get $62 million total. The city's gang reduction program gets about half that. So politicians in Los Angeles are at the very least very clear about their priorities. What has this done to LA? We don't have to look far to see the answer to that. Last week, a homeless man walked into a furniture store in the west side of Los Angeles and murdered a graduate student who was working alone there. He stabbed her to death for no apparent reason and then walked out. He's still at large. She was 24, now she's dead. Today, her father told Fox and Friends that he holds city officials responsible for the killing. Watch.
What's endemic in our society right now is
Liberal Justice Stephen Breyer will be retiring this summer at the end of the High Court's current term. The huge news leaking out before Breyer could officially announce it himself. Multiple sources tell Shannon Bream that the justice was surprised with how this played out. But President Biden and his White House claim they don't know anything about it.
there has been no announcement from Justice Breyer. Let him make whatever statement he's going to make, and I'll be happy to talk about it later.
The president has stated and reiterated his commitment to nominating a black woman to the Supreme Court, and certainly stands by that. For today, again, I'm just not going to be able to say anything about any specifics until, of course, Justice Breyer makes any announcement, should he decide to make an announcement.
Democrats are reportedly looking at ramming through Biden's eventual nominee and follow a similar timeline that Republicans used for Amy Coney Barrett. The White House confirming Biden's looking at a woman of color to fill the role, while getting pressed on who he may pick.
Is there any scenario in which the president would select his Vice President Kamala Harris for the Supreme Court?
Again, I'm not going to speak to any considerations, preparations, lists.
Just wondering, hypothetically, theoretically, would someone who was an Attorney General of a large state and who served with many key Senate votes be an attractive candidate to the president for an open Supreme Court seat?
I see what you did there, Peter. But the president has every intention, as he said before, of running for re-election. and for running for re-election with Vice President Harris on the ticket as his partner.
So what would motivate a leak right before Breyer announces, possibly from the White House?
Well, this is super high stakes, and one of my favorite things to do is cover a Supreme Court nomination. So I was quite excited today when I heard about this. Obviously, Breyer has had a long career in the judiciary, not only in the Supreme Court but before. And so this decision, it's such high stakes for any sort of president. I think now there is reporting that says his decision to announce was imminent and that the White House maybe jumped the gun by a hair, or somebody at the White House did, or maybe not the White House. I understand why, because they have a lot of work to do. You got to get everybody in line. Now, what did we report this morning on America's Newsroom? That Biden is losing in the polls, even with Democrats. So what is one thing that can focus the mind, and that is a Supreme Court nomination. Now, because the filibuster rules had changed, and you can get to a Supreme Court vote with 51 votes now, it's not as big a deal, but they only have 51 votes, right? 50 plus Kamala Harris. Right. The White House has also said it's going to be a judge. The president has said on the campaign trail it's going to be a black woman. So you can look at how many judges there are, and I would imagine we probably could figure out their names pretty quickly. That list will narrow down. Senator Schumer might not be the majority leader after the November midterms. So they had to do this right away. If they waited until the end of the term, which was in end of June, that would only have given them 4 months. And I think a lot of people, including somebody like Kirsten Sinema or Joe Manchin, could have said, you know what, we ought to wait. Yeah. We ought to wait and see. This way they can try to get it done right away.
And now, I guess the nominee has to go through Manchin and Sinema a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And they hold a lot of cards.
I'm with Dana. This is fantastic. Immediately you think, okay, this is the best news Joe's ever heard because he needs a historical POC, right? Who's just hanging around driving him nuts right now? It's like you can unload the lemon and the lemon gets a promotion. I mean, that's amazing.
Win-win.
But I don't know if it's going to do it because it's such an obvious ploy. I think that Merrick Garland should come out and identify as a non-binary person of color and become a historical first. But I'll tell you this, whoever gets nominated, I'm going to say that person, be they male or female or non-binary, did something really bad to me. A long time ago. I'm not going to say what it is that they did to me.
Can you remember what they did?
It might have been, I don't know yet. It might be college. It might have been like high school. Might have been in the gym. Who knows? But I'm going to tell you, whatever I say is going to be 100% true. It's disgusting, and I would prefer if you guys just respected my privacy when this happens. But the thing is, the question is, will the Republicans be as disgusting and partisan and vindictive as the Dems were on basically every single nominee? And I don't believe two wrongs make a right, but boy, it's going to feel good. I would rather have two wrongs. Sometimes two wrongs are better than a right. And in this case, I think that I want an explosive hearing with corrupt lawyers, freaky shrinks, the return of Jessica or Julie Swetnick. Got to get Albanati on like a Zoom call from jail. I'm gonna go and get my handmaid's costume out of storage, and I'm gonna wear it to the Supreme Court steps.
You know what, Greg? As much as we all want to see that, I don't think that's gonna happen, Geraldo. Do you see this happening the way it would be if that had happened?
And I also call on Republicans right now to be gracious to the nominee. It's going to go through no matter what you do.
Gracious, yes.
Be gracious. Don't be like the Democrats. Don't torture the nominee. I thought that Kamala Harris would be a great idea. It was the first name that jumped into my mind. She could be a terrific Supreme Court justice, an appointment for life. She's only in her 50es. She'd be there for 30 years.
Think she would be a good justice?
I think she'd be a terrific.
You thought she would be a good VP? She has a mental.
That was also true, but it's a role fit for her. But
a lifelong appointment is a role for her.
It's not going to happen. They've already put out the D.C. Circuit Judge Brown Jackson, the South Carolina District Judge Michelle Childs, Leondra Cougar, all black women. It's interesting that it's definitely affirmative action, right? As they are considering the seminal affirmative action case against Harvard and University of North Carolina. So it is ironic.
Yeah.
It is ironic. But I'm all for targeted. There is no black woman on the court. Why not do it? And Republicans behave.
What about a Puerto Rican?
They have one.
You can't have more. Why not more, Geraldo?
Yeah.
Judge Shanine.
She is my favorite judge.
She is?
What?
So she's the one who gave you disinformation on 100,000 kids
She's
dying from
terrible,
COVID. Are you kidding?
But she makes great rice and beans.
Why?
Hold on.
Okay, that's
Is that even
that's the new
true?
standard. Okay.
You made that up. Oh, man, thank God that wasn't
So
me.
here's the thing. This is coming at such an opportune time for Joe Biden. The distraction is perfect for him. His numbers are in the tank. You know, now everybody knows Supreme Court hearing, nominee hearing, we can get crazy. We can go lunatic.
Live TV.
And you know what? And it is live TV. But I have to tell you, Geraldo, I'm tired of the Republicans, you know, playing by the Marcus of Queenberry rules. I'm tired of that. I'm not saying you have to be an animal about it, but darn, let's just let people know we got a slap in there too when we can do it. And not everybody is perfectly clean. And and you know what?
See a Republican slap a black woman around? That's going to be great.
Come on, you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about figuratively. What they did to Kavanaugh and what they did to Amy Coney Barrett, it was outrageous.
Vladimir Putin already put 127,000 troops along the border with Ukraine, and now apparently he's moving in the weaponry and more of them at the Ukraine border as an invasion looks more and more likely. Now President Biden is considering deploying thousands of U.S. troops to Eastern Europe and the Baltics in response. A move that is very different from his restrained, quote-unquote, do not provoke Putin strategy. Ukraine has now received a second shipment of weapons from the United States as part of defense aid. And all of this comes as Biden's foreign policy perception is still reeling from this summer's disastrous Afghanistan exit. Congressman Michael McCaul, Senator Joni Ernst, calling out the president's current Russia approach.
We're seen as weak right now, but because of President Biden, his comments about that a limited invasion was somehow acceptable, and that NATO was divided. This president has made so many concessions with nothing in return. That's why Putin smells weakness.
So far with this administration, we have seen a doctrine of appeasement, and that certainly is not going to deter President Putin and Russia from invading Ukraine.
Joey Jones now, Fox News contributor, Fox Nation host, retired Marine bomb technician. First, I just want to get your top line thoughts.
We have no war. We have no business going to war with Russia when we don't know if our government would ever support our military in doing so. The last 20 years would argue the most we would do is appease some faction of our country that might want war, allow a bunch of folks to die, and then have no resolution at the end. And until our government has shown that it has the political will to see something through, the American people shouldn't support it moving in that direction.
Joey, are there tinges of what we saw, all the heartbreak, all the pain, the loss of our exit from Afghanistan here?
You know, that pain and heartbreak was 20 years in the making. I certainly blame President Biden for how the month of August went out, but I blame pretty much every political leader who had something to say and a vote to cast over the last 20 years for how the war ended. We had a little bit of a tail wagging the dog situation where our democracy is amazing, but with every midterm and every presidential election is an opportunity to take the status quo, turn it on its head, and campaign on it. And the American people kind of followed that, and that's not how we should do war in this country. And I'm not trying to be overly critical or overly pessimistic, but you know, look at the current situation, right? So we're going to put troops in other countries, probably to posture against Russia a day too late. And also to let those other countries know, hey, we'll have troops there, so they probably won't come for you next. I don't know that means we're gonna send those troops into Ukraine and fight Russia, but what it probably means, we're sending a lot of weapons to Ukraine, and now Russia's talking about doing some sort of a Russian-friendly government. I mean, are we about to start a proxy war, a Ukrainian civil war? Is that really what we're about to do?
Well, the Russians today,
proxy wars isn't any better.
Are denying that. And, you know, one of the comparisons that I've been reading about is the Taliban certainly didn't care how we were pulling out. They took full advantage.
Right.
The terrorists who killed our 13 Americans didn't care. And perhaps Putin doesn't care how we handle it either. I mean, we were scurrying, trying to get our people out of there over the weekend. It felt eerily familiar in that sense. A New York Times piece with this: President Biden is considering deploying several thousand U.S. troops as well as warships and aircraft to NATO allies in the Baltics and Eastern Europe. The move would signal a major pivot for the Biden administration, which up until recently was taking a restrained stance on Ukraine, out of fear of provoking Russia into invading. In a meeting on Saturday at Camp David, Pentagon officials presented the president with several options that would shift American military assets much closer to Putin's doorstep. We're watching this in real time now, and strategy is what in this case?
Well, here's the deal. When you stand in front of the world and say something as stupid as a minor incursion is okay, this is a price you have to pay afterwards. And just God forbid that price include American blood. That's how I feel about it. Posturing is a military strategy. It's one that's worked well for us. JFK probably did it best in the most recent years with the blockade in Cuba. But posturing means that you're willing to go the next step, but hopefully smart enough to not have to. I don't know if this is posturing or just straight reactionary, we've got to do something because that speech last week was that bad. The truth is, this isn't a 2022 problem. This is multiple years in the making. I mean, we saw what happened with Crimea. We saw that Russia invaded Georgia. How we've handled everything along the way builds up to how this plays out. And I don't know what Russia is. This is chess, and I play checkers. I go out, take bombs apart, and shoot the bad guy in front of me. You know, I don't know how this plays out, but I can tell you as an American and a voter, I'm beyond frustrated.
Look, it could spread. China now looking across at Taiwan. I mean, if they start to put ships in the water, if they start to do the things that we're starting to hear about right now and reporting on, I mean, it isn't just about Russia, and that's the point. Afghanistan and the way that we handled it in such a bloody, horrible end wasn't just about us in Afghanistan. The world was watching. The world.
I'm 35, and I'm old enough to remember when we used to champion winning wars, and that was a long time ago, I guess. Now we talk about how do we get out of this situation, and I'm okay with that, but at least have a plan. It doesn't seem like this president has one.
Can we talk just a moment, though, about how this is being handled and what effect that has on the strategy? Because we know
This one looks out of my
the president
categories
had
as well.
generals around him, and then after all the
It's
hearings
holding
on
the
Capitol
color.
Hill, he went his own way.
It's got body,
They were
a
telling
little
him
bit of
one
a
thing, he
body
decided
to it.
go another way. Is
Eyes
that how
right
that
here.
plays out? I mean, you have served,
Let's look
and you
at it for
know
a
that when the call comes from on high, you go do your job, and the commander-in-chief goes to the generals, and we didn't do that with Afghanistan. Are you concerned about that happening here?
I'll tell you what I'm most concerned about is the world didn't need to see, and quite frankly, as Americans, we didn't need to see a situation where we have to grill our generals to find out that the president wasn't telling the truth about their own advice. To see that much of our cabinet, of our leadership, of the men and women who decisively send our troops to war for a righteous cause at that much of odds with each other. And that's what Russia saw, that's what China saw, and that's what the American people saw.
Jerry Jones.
I can't make it out good enough to call it.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Kilmeade. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to click to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page. This is the only way that I know for sure that you're not going to miss any great commentary, any great news bites, any great interviews coming your way on Fox. You can get it all here on YouTube. So subscribe.
Fucker. Okay. I don't know. Just have to think of it as shadow imagery, I guess. Couldn't get enough detail in it.
Paying people not to work, raising energy costs, and throwing people out of the workforce with their anti-science, unjustified mandates. And so as a result, even with a low unemployment number, there are still nearly 3 million Americans out of the workforce compared to what we had with Trump just before the pandemic. In fact, I looked up the historic data on labor participation, the size of the American workforce as a proportion of the working age population. And here it is. Under Biden, as of last month, we're down to a Labour participation rate of just 61.9%. Apart from at the height of the pandemic economic shutdown, that's the lowest since the dregs of the Jimmy Carter stagnation and malaise in February 1977. So, this great booming economy Biden and all the rest of the Muppets are trying to brag about now has the worst inflation in 39 years and the worst job market in 45 years. Yeah, I guess that is historic. Historically bad.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to...
Yeah. Can't anybody do more than a 5-minute video?
Today we are going to be talking and taking a look at bad parenting. As an overview, I would say that right now in America, we have a problem with woke parenting in particular. Like, these parents need to be parented. And so they are trying to raise their children so that they can put up a status on Facebook and get applause for being so loving and welcoming. And at the end of the day, you know, kids are little rugrats and they need to be parented and told what's right and what's wrong. Not that everything that they do is right. There's just too much validation going on for children, and parents have completely abandoned what it actually means to rear a child. My general parenting philosophy is I'm the boss, you're the applesauce. My husband and I genuinely believe we are the parents, you are the child. You know, obviously you can imagine, basically my husband's English, so if you've ever seen like Nanny 911 when they bring the nannies over from London and they're like, you should not do that. That's my husband, and I support that. Kids need rules, kids need schedules, they need guidelines. There's a time and a place, you know, for children to express themselves. But, you know, we believe in the word no. There's nothing that bothers me more than parents who I meet that are like, we just don't want our child to have any negative reinforcement. We just, like, don't want our child to hear the word no. And I'm like, are these the kids that grow up and become, like, rapists and killers? Just like they don't understand the word no? Like, what do you mean you don't understand the word no? You know, kids need to understand that they are allowed to do certain things and they are not allowed to do certain things. Okay, so let's dive into some of these videos that you guys have for me.
School district now, it's a nightmare. I go to enroll my child, and my kiddo is standing right there. I hand them the birth certificate, and I say, see right here, this is his sex. He is a boy, he goes by he, him. I have no issues at his past school, and I don't expect to have any issues here. And I swear, it was like Karen, the transphobic secretary, was just waiting on us that day. She said she wouldn't put my child in the school system as his name because it has to match the birth certificate. But again, had no issues at the last school. I told her I absolutely would not enroll my child as a female. And she said, you will and you are. She enrolled my child as a female, then sent mail to my house with my child's dead name on it. At this point, my child is supposed to start school on Monday and is enrolled in the system as a female. Every single teacher in the school knew about my child, and the students were told a little girl was coming to class. This is a visual representation of my mood. Like and follow for part 3.
Yeah, that's scary. That's
It is scary.
I mean, that's, you check on that child in 18 years, that child is going to be so messed up, and the fact that this is on the internet and nothing's going to be done about it is the worst part of it. Like, people are basically saying, I'm abusing my child, I'm going to make a TikTok about abusing my child, and nothing's going to happen to me because we've mainstreamed child abuse.
I'm sorry, what? Oh, no, ma'am. No. What? You watched this at school? What's it called? Oh, no. With the children white people should not ever be talking about putting on war paint. That is racism, that is appropriation. The ancestors died trying to defend themselves. Okay, so no, that is not okay. Movies that I enjoyed that I can no longer watch because I know better. Homophobia, transphobia, mocking people with disabilities, sexual assault, misogyny. I'm not gonna touch that one because y'all know. And before you go saying, why can't you just let her enjoy things? Because when you know better, you do better. And when you know better, you teach your children better. And if I just let her go along with it and tell her it's okay, then she'll grow up thinking that it's no big deal, and then she'll grow up ignorant like you.
Oh gosh, it's just so much. It's first off, it's so much ignorance. She talking about war paint. Obviously, a reference to Native Americans. Don't let your children wear war paint because they died fighting for their lives. No, people don't know this, but the majority, 90% plus of Native Americans died because they caught smallpox, and the settlers had no idea that they had smallpox. So that was by disease. It wasn't a genocide that was trying to be committed against Native Americans. Beyond that, Native Americans cannibalized one another, literally, ate one another, and you can find that even in the New York Times, which acknowledged that. In doing an anthropological study of what was left over in Colorado, they determined that they did that. So this whole idea that Native Americans were just gatherers sitting around kumbayaing until settlers came is just so fictitious and ridiculous. Human beings have been at war since the beginning of humanity. And for whatever reason, the only people that they want to bear any responsibility for that war are Americans. And I just can't imagine raising a kid that can't enjoy basic things. Like, kids shouldn't have to think like this. I remember actually when I was a kid, I loved the Pocahontas soundtrack so much. That was back when we had the little VHS cassettes that you could put in and you could just rewind it and listen to it over and over again. And to me, that's a celebration, of Native American culture. I never thought of it as like, well, this is a horrible, song, and how could Disney possibly do this, and we're horrible people. Like, children are supposed to be wildly imaginative, and beyond that, everything they do, what is the intent behind something? When a child is dressing up like something, it's because they're envious. They go, I love this so much, I want to look like this person. And you don't want them to feel that way. It's like the disappearance of the Land O'Lakes butter lady. So your solution to the idea that we disappeared Native American culture is to disappear it even further and allow it to be seen nowhere. I mean, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's just sheer stupidity. And yeah, it's gonna really suck to have that as a mother growing up.
Are you sure? I mean, does everything have to be about race all the time? Oh, honey, I'm really sorry that happened. Sometimes we think that racism is a thing of the past, or that it's about one individual person or a group of people treating others differently. In reality, racism is systemic. That means that it's written into our laws and policies, and it affects every part of our life. I'm really glad you're bringing attention to it.
Which law? Which policy, Mom? Mom can't answer it because there's literally not a single law or policy that is in place that is racist. There just is not. It's just a repeat talking point. They just keep saying there's systemic racism and there's laws and there's policies that impact Black Americans. And then when you ask them which one specifically, they can't answer the question because, as I said, you're dealing with parents that are stupid and they're passing down stupidity to their children. And by the way, the fact that these parents are always doing this online should really tell you that this is not about fighting any sorts of oppression. It's about getting likes and clicks. I mean, there's an underlying narcissism that's happening. Like I said, they do a lot of this stuff because they want to show their friends how amazing and how woke they are. It's really pathetic, and it's sad because the only people that hurt because of it are children when they're designed to see every little thing and every little interaction that they have as an act of racism.
So you're singing to him. Does he enjoy the singing, and what are you singing to him?
It's a lot of show tunes, because that's what I like. So, we're raising Jay until he decides he's straight.
Okay.
And on the way back from the hospital, we played Britney Spears because that was what Justin managed to listen to. That was his first exposure to music. But yeah, it's a lot of singing. I'm writing a lot of songs for him. Everything has a song. I got a poo-poo in my dip dip and my daddy fish it out. I mean, you can make a song about anything.
Wow. Well, that's a catchy one. So you're raising him gay until he says he's straight, but you'll love him just the same if he is straight, right?
Absolutely. Actually, Justin and I were saying he's absolutely going to be, I could just probably be like, such a straight kid.
Yeah.
Who knows? I mean, do whatever I want. But I just have a feeling you're going to want to play football. I could just tell. And I'm going to have to learn how to do all those things with him.
Right. Well, if there is a God, yes, because it would be wonderful to see you trying to do that with him. So you're reading.